Hey guys, Veebat here with another V-Plays, taking a look at the Z-17 Z-7, which is going to be a heavy fighter modification of the Z-17 Z that we know as the bomber at Tier 4. This is going to be the Tier 3 heavy, and while it doesn't sport the dual 20mm cannons that we see with the Focke-Wulf 5.7, it does get 120 and then 3 7.92 machine guns. So this is actually by request of somebody that said, you know, I think I gotta figure out how to fly this airplane. And honestly, with all of the lower tiered heavies, you're going to find that the maneuverability is very lacking, the acceleration is lacking. So if you want to be effective, you have to utilize the range, the altitude performance, and the high top-end speed that you have available on these airframes to be able to come in and do these boom and zoom runs, but maintaining your speed. It's even more important than the other examples we've had where we said, you know, don't overturn, don't overcommit, because if you lose your speed, you lose your aircraft. It's going to be the same type of thing here. In fact, it's just going to be amplified. So if you see us making a lot of drastic turns, you'll note that the speed drops significantly. The airspeed envelope is very narrow for the maneuverability on these airframes, and you find yourself lacking. So we're constantly trying to build up altitude because most aircraft are going to struggle to get above 3,000 feet at this tier, and we'll be able to hone in and sight in on these targets and just let loose with the guns. Now, much like the last few videos we've done where we've talked about cannon and machine gun combos, the cannon is the one that you're going to want to be making contact, especially at range. As you close that distance, the machine guns are going to start augmenting that damage, getting those fires started, helping with some of the crit damage, and augmenting the overall damage output. But making that 20 hit at range, that's what's going to be getting your initial damage and crippling the enemy aircraft. So we're isolating enemies, we're picking targets, we're not going into furballs, and we're trying to maintain our altitude if we can. It doesn't seem like we're really high, but we're actually fairly high. The bombs on this airframe are a 200-second reload, which is pretty typical for heavies at this tier. They're more or less meant for the burst to capture that initial zone very quickly, or possibly very key objectives as you start heading towards those in these battles, like a command center or a military facility. We're up at 4,000 feet. We're relatively untouchable up here with the exception of another heavy, and we see the enemy player in a Focke-Wulf 5.7. Someone once asked me what's the most overpowered plane in the game. I say it's going to be this Focke-Wulf 5.7. Those two 20s at this tier are absolutely devastating, and then he still has a 20 in the tail gunner. So that tail gunner can do a lot of damage to us if we're not careful. We took out both his tail and his wing, and that aircraft, like I said, a lot of the heavies at this tier don't have any maneuverability. So as soon as we knocked out the tail, he could not recover and was kind of doomed to crash into a mountain. We do have the damage output at this tier to be able to knock out these ground attackers. We're going to go ahead and get some altitude. We're already behind on zones, but I'm not stressing out too much about it because left to our own devices, we can pretty much flip these zones. It's not that big a deal. It's just going to take a little bit of time. In fact, we just flipped the zone just now because we had so many allies working here, as well as our player who is in a German fighter aircraft. The Focke-Wulf 5.7 came back very quickly. So we're going to go ahead and focus him down. What he should have done right from the get-go is look for the most dangerous target to him, which was going to be me. Player-controlled heavy is a very dangerous aircraft. Now we're actually, unfortunately, going to overshoot this target. Just couldn't get the turn on him. I was going to hop in the tail gunner to finish him off, but you can see here that our fellow player in the Focke-Wulf 159 was able to knock him out. Quick little burst from the guns is also very helpful. The equipment load we have on here. Oh, hello friend. I don't think we damaged each other on that pass, but we got dangerously close. I should have paid more attention as I was the one approaching from his stern. But we did go with the long barrels on this aircraft because you do get a weapon augmentation right from the beginning, or a weapon equipment slot. So that increased range is one of the strengths of a heavy at these lower tiers, so being able to get even more reach on it is even more helpful. We are struggling to maintain this zone, but we do have a bit of a buffer in the form of the other garrison as well as our airfield, which hasn't really been contested too much. The airfield they've left alone. These types of matches at lower tiers, they may be a lot closer distance-wise, but when it comes to time of flight, a lot of these aircraft are going to struggle to get over 200, 300 miles an hour. So you being in this heavy fighter that can get up to some pretty decent speeds is going to have a run of the battlefield. This is kind of where I started to really like heavy fighters right from the beginning of the game. In fact, in closed beta, I think the Focke-Wulf 5-7 was one of my favorite aircraft. I called it the flying greenhouse because the glass ran the length of the top of the airframe all the way to the tail gunner. Looked cool, but I'm not sure I'd want to get shot at in that. Okay, now we're scoping in on this multi-role fighter, but it has that aircraft definitely has the maneuverability of a light fighter, so you can see him spinning trying to avoid our incoming fire, but again, we can reach out and knock him out of the sky pretty easily. Quick blap of the guns just to double check here. First I thought that there was going to be 4 machine guns, but there's only 3, so now I had to check myself on my math as I count them out. But again, the machine guns aren't the ones that are doing the lion's share of the damage. It's going to be coming from that 20mm cannon, and then once you close the distance, the overlap, the machine guns will end up getting the hits. Now, we're going to dive in here on this low health aircraft and try and get some shots out on it. Our ally was trying to go after him as well, but he passed him, and unfortunately it looks like our Blenheim was knocked out by the DO-17 Z-7 on the enemy team here, the Stefan. Now, I'm thought about going up after him, but these aircraft, again, at low tier, the engine power just isn't quite there to do those vertical climbs. You're going to have to slowly gain altitude, and you can dump that altitude for airspeed easily enough, but it really does take a bit of time to get up to higher altitudes. You can't just skyrocket up like you could in FJ1 or a Goblin. We do have an aircraft on our tail here, but not too worried about it. We got a lot of hit points available. Trying to help out with the ground attack here, realizing that I do have bombs on the airframe. These light fighters are pretty easy to knock out of the sky. Getting that 20 on target, you can see we're really knocking off a lot from that heavy's hit points up there. And the guns take a really long time to overheat. We just locked in grade 2 heavy fighter, and I was going to come in here and drop on here. But if I was paying attention, I would have realized that that was a wasted drop, and I probably could have saved those two if needed. We lost our pilot, again not getting overcommitted, looking at the next target, and it wasn't until just a second ago I realized that that was my ally shooting at that airframe, and I should have let him have that kill. I really didn't need to kill that aircraft that desperately. This DO-17 Z-7, we have similar capabilities. Well, we have the exact same capabilities, but the reason I was able to get around on him is I actually dipped the nose and did an underturn. I know a lot of times I talk about heavies doing an up and over turn because you can build up momentum, but these aircraft at lower tier, yet again, the lack of engine power means that you're not going to be able to sustain yourself in the up and over a lot of the time unless you were going into that up and over with a lot of speed. So in that kind of slow speed turning fight that we had, dipping the nose down allowed me to get that airspeed like I would normally get on the back end of an up and over turn, but without having to waste what little boost I had left. So there is opportunities to go ahead and do that from time to time. Now let's get back to the hangar and take another look at this airframe a little bit more in depth. Alright, so here we are back in the hangar. You'll note that we did not get Wing Legend. That's because this is Tier 3, and you're not going to get rewarded for going and stomping on poor new players. So that is good. However, I still think that they should get rid of these missions that are on these low tiers, because there really isn't much of a need to fly low tier aircraft, and the times that I do, it's a little bit unfair because I'm coming in there with a Focke-Wulf 5.7 that's fully kitted out as a specialist airframe, and it's just not fair for the enemy players. And even now with the Do-17 Z-7, it's proven to be a very capable airframe as well. So, like we said, the machine guns aren't doing too bad at 23 damage per second per gun. Together, they will outpace the amount of damage coming from the 20, but with the range that they're operating, they're just not going to matter immediately. So, it's better to kind of hold your shots for those 20s, and then once you get close enough, the shell travel time of the machine guns being so fast, once the 20 starts hitting that closer range, then those 7.92s will just riddle that airframe with bullets. And of course, the smaller the caliber gun, the higher the chance of fire, which is going to really help out at these guns in particular. Now, we did just pull up the Focke-Wulf 5.7. The Focke-Wulf 5.7 definitely is the reigning champ. You can see here 65 damage per second per 20 millimeter cannon with an even greater range and the same rate of fire as our 20 right here. But it really doesn't seem to matter too much, because the maneuverability of these airframes, if you take a look, is going to end up leveling the playing field, because you see that the maneuverability is slightly higher on the Do-17 Z-7, and the airspeed and altitude performance are very comparable. So the Do-17 Z-7, I gotta say that because if I just said Do-17, you'd think I was talking about a bomber, right? But this modified bomber right here does have the capability of getting around on that Focke-Wulf 5.7, and we don't suffer nearly as much as he does when he loses his tail. Don't get me wrong, it definitely stinks to lose your tail, but when you're looking at roll rates that are 40 degrees a second opposed to 50, that really does change the way an aircraft feels. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you've ever flown one of these aircraft and you just feel like it's sluggish even though it has a decent turn time, it's going to be because you still have to roll those wings horizontal to your, or perpendicular to your path of turning. So if I want to make a turn to the right, my wings have to turn vertical so they're oriented straight up and down so I can actually make that turn. The Do-17 Z-7 is going to be able to do that easier than the Focke-Wulf 5.7 would, because the Focke-Wulf 5.7, it just feels so sluggish in its movements. But that makes sense just based on the type of airframes that they were way back when. Anyways, there isn't much to say about these aircraft. It's a tier 3, but if you play it like you would any of the other heavies, I find that it works out just fine. I was just testing this setup out, but I can tell you that the guns don't overheat that fast at all, so going for the long gun barrels I think is a better option than going for the gas operated action, because one of your major strengths with this aircraft is the ability to get the shots out at much longer range than a lot of other aircraft at tier 3, and then keeping that accuracy so that way you can ensure that they're making contact is going to be much more important than just the increased rate of fire and the amount of damage you can kick out. So yeah, it's a neat plane, and the other nice thing is the bombs are internal, so don't ever take them off. It never affects your airspeed. Always leave the bombs on. It doesn't hurt you at all, which is a nice little perk to have with this airframe as well. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll catch you on the next one.